Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be setting up my journal for the month of June, and as always I'm going to do a flip through in the beginning of my last setup, which was from May, and I thought the color scheme was really nice for this one. It was very dreamy and I really enjoyed making all the weekly spreads, but for June I honestly struggled a little bit with the theme, even though it was very simple, but I actually ended up being really happy with the result. So the theme for June will be cherries, so I chose a bright red and a green, as well as two pink tones for some of the smaller details and some backgrounds. And then I'm also going to be using both the Muji Gel Pen and the Pilot Juice Pen, and lastly some stamps for some of the bigger titles. Starting off with the first page, as always I'm making a small calendar, and I didn't really change anything for this one, so the layout is the same as always. And I'm first using the lightest pink as a background for the days on the top, and then also for some lines, but I ended up covering them with the darker pink instead. Then I'm just writing the weekdays on the top in black, and the days are 2 spaces wide, and then I'm also writing the dates into one row and leaving another row empty in between them so it's not too crowded. Here I crossed out the last few days of May with the bright red. It actually looks a bit more pink on camera, but it's a very saturated red with a little bit of a pinkish hue. And then here I'm just covering the lines with the darker pink so the colors look a bit more balanced. The page I struggled with the most was the cover page this time because I wasn't really sure what kind of design I wanted to go with, but I ended up going for a vertical layout with decorations all along the middle of the page and then also the title in the very middle. First I used the light pink for some borders on both sides and a subtle grid pattern as a background for the doodles, and I also colored in the background for the title with the same color. Next I'm using the stamps for the title, and for some of the letters I did mess them up a little bit, but I just used a bit of correction tape and also the white acrylograph pen to make them look a bit more clean. And I actually don't mind that the letters aren't super straight. I think it's pretty cute that way. Next I made the pattern, and I started with some very simple cherries, and I just made 2 red circles, and then I kind of alternated the direction for a bit more variation, and then I added the stems and the small leaves with the green shade. I filled some of the other spaces with pink cherry blossoms and also some smaller red flowers to make the pattern look a bit more full and also make it more varied. Lastly, I also added some smaller dots with the bright red to tie everything together. And that is it for these first 2 pages. I'm actually really happy with how they turned out, and let's move on to my habit trackers. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you probably know that my trackers have been the same for quite some time, but this time I actually wanted to switch things up a bit and also include fewer habits to track and kind of focus on the ones that are actually more helpful and important to me. And I was really inspired by a channel called Papery Thoughts. I think she makes really gorgeous layouts and themes, so definitely check her out on YouTube and Instagram. I will leave all her links down in the description. First I used some of the stamps for the first part of the title, and I made one for the daily habits first and then later on also for the weekly habits. I used the stamps to write daily, and then I wrote habits underneath it with the Muji Gel Pen, and I also added a bit of color on the sides. Then I used the light pink again for the background of the titles for the habit trackers, and this meant I only included 4 daily trackers, and I placed them into the middle of the page. Next I'm using the darker pink for the borders, and the boxes are 7 spaces wide and 6 spaces tall because I like to include the weekdays in the first row of the trackers, and as always I'm also leaving another space empty in between the titles and the boxes, so the trackers are 8 spaces tall in total. I left 2 spaces in between the trackers horizontally and 1 space vertically, and then there are 5 spaces on the left and right, but it might be a bit different depending on the size of your journal, so for reference my journal has 26 spaces horizontally. I also colored in the background for the weekdays with that same light pink, and then I wrote the habits in black. This month I'm tracking not using my phone in the morning, doing some kind of movement, whether it be a full workout or just going for a little walk, doing some 3D practice, and lastly not using any screens before I go to bed. Then I'm also writing the weekdays in black, and I used the Pilot Juice Pen for some of these smaller writings because it's just slightly thinner, although it's not very noticeable on camera. I also crossed out the days from May again with the bright red to keep things consistent. Then to add a bit more color to the page, I decided to add more cherry doodles on the sides next to the trackers, and I first drew the cherries again, and then I also added the light pink grid pattern because I forgot to do it before, and I tried not to smudge the colors because the markers are water-based, so you just have to be a bit more careful. Next, I added these small flowers again, and I actually really love how these doodles ended up turning out. I think the colors work really well together, and they were also super quick, which is always something I really enjoy. Underneath, I wanted to add some weekly habits, which haven't really changed at all because I still find them very useful. So I first made the title in the same style again with the stamps on the top, and then writing habits underneath with the Muji Gel Pen. The title was not perfectly centered, but I'm trying to kind of let go of some of my perfectionism because it really only makes me unhappy, and that's not at all the point of bullet journaling. Next, I'm using the light pink as a background for the weekly habits, and then I'm writing the titles in black again. This month I'm tracking my usual weekly habits, so making my weekly spreads, having a self-care day, doing a weekly reset to get ready for the next week, and lastly working out 1 to 2 times per week, which is the only new addition to my habits this month. To track them, I drew 5 circles with the bright red next to the habits that I can color in when I complete a habit. Moving on to the next page, I always like including some sections where I can just kind of plan the month a little bit in advance, since I always just make one weekly spread at a time, and this time I changed up the content of these sections a little bit because I wanted to have one box for each week, as well as 2 smaller sections for the events for this month and then next month, which I think will be very helpful. I made the title in the same style again as before, and I just wrote June planning, and then I used the light pink marker again as a background for the titles. I also made the sections a little bit smaller than usual, so this time they're only 10 spaces wide, but I still left 2 spaces empty in between them horizontally and also vertically. I left another space empty underneath the title again, and then I added the borders for the sections with the darker pink to keep everything consistent. Then I'm writing the titles in black, and for the first 4 sections I just wrote week 1 through 4, and then for the 2 sections on the bottom I did one for June and one for July. To add a bit more color, I drew some very small cherries in the lower right corner of each box, which I thought looked really cute. And lastly, I also colored in every second line with the lightest pink because I wanted to make them look a little bit less empty, and I used to love doing this and I stopped for some reason, but I might just incorporate it more again. And that's it for these 2 pages, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of the month. I went for a pretty simple layout this time with 8 equal sections and some space in the middle of the pages for some doodles horizontally, and I started in the first section with a mini calendar, and all the sections are 11 spaces wide and 14 spaces tall, with 2 spaces empty in between them horizontally, and the space in the middle is 7 spaces tall, but again it might be a bit different in your journal. I added a small title above the mini calendar with these stamps, and also a border with the darker pink shade all around, as well as 2 small flowers next to the title, although I'm not quite sure how I feel about them yet. And lastly, I also wrote week 1 underneath the calendar to fill up the space a bit more. For my daily sections, I first used the light pink as a background for the titles to keep everything looking nice and consistent, and then I made the borders with the same darker pink shade. I also left 1 space empty underneath the titles again because it makes them look a bit less crowded. In case you're looking for some weekly spread inspiration, I post my other spreads every week in the community tab of my channel, so you can go check them out if you want. Also, if you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe if you enjoy my content and would like to see more in the future. Then I wrote the titles in black in the middle of the sections, and I also added the dates on the bottom of the sections with the bright red for a bit of a pop of color. And I started on the 3rd of June because I wanted to include the last week in my May setup, since there are only 2 days from June in that week. Then, like I mentioned, I wanted to fill the space in between the sections with more doodles, so I went through the same process as before and added the cherry pattern. I made sure to spread all of the elements evenly so there are no weird gaps and they're also not too close together, because I think it can make the pattern look a bit more chaotic otherwise. I think one of the reasons I struggled with this theme in the beginning is because I was comparing my spreads to other people, and I was kind of trying to force myself to make a super minimalistic theme, but I'm not sure if it's actually the right thing for me. I really enjoy these simple themes, but I do like incorporating more doodles and colors, so maybe minimalism just isn't quite right for me. I will still experiment a little bit in the future, but I'm still having fun with my themes, and every time I complete a spread I'm actually very happy with it, so maybe I'm just overthinking it, to be honest. I don't know if this is actually relatable at all, since I am a content creator and I probably think about these things a little bit more, but let me know if you can relate or just your thoughts on this topic if you feel like it. Also, as always, I would love to know what you think about this theme, and feel free to leave any questions in the comments. I'm always happy to answer them. Anyway, I also colored in every second line in the sections with the light pink again, and then lastly I also added a bit of a border to that first section. And that's it for this setup, so let's do a little flip through. Like I mentioned, I had a bit of a harder time with designing this setup, but I'm actually super happy with the end result, and that's really all that matters. So I really hope you guys like it as well. Again, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this video as always. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!